Picture this. It is 50,000 years ago. You have not eaten in 2 days. You finally found the herd. You tracked their prints for miles. And this morning you mapped the exact route to intercept them. Then the sky opens up, not a light drizzle, a heavy, cold, wind-driven rain that refuses to stop. It falls all afternoon. It falls all night. By the second morning, it is still falling, and everything has changed. The tracks you were following are gone, washed into mud. The ground is too slick to move across without snapping an ankle, and out here, a broken ankle is a death sentence. The river beside your camp is rising fast. And the fire, the only thing standing between you and the cold, between you and the dark, between you and whatever is circling out there in the wet, is starting to fail. You are not bored. You are trapped. For almost all of human history, a week of rain was not a lazy afternoon indoors. It was one of the most dangerous stretches of time a person could live through. And the strange truth is this. What our ancestors did during that week, huddled in the dark, waiting for the sky to clear, might be more responsible for who we are today than almost anything they did on a clear, sunny day. Today, when it rains, you shut the window, make a coffee, and open Netflix. The sound of rain makes you sleepy. It is comfort. Background noise. 50,000 years ago, that exact same sound could kill a person 3 different ways before it even stopped falling. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you will never look at a rainy day the same way again. Before we go back into the storm, quick question for you. If you were sealed inside a cave for a full week with nothing but a fire and your own hands, what is the one modern comfort you think you would miss the most? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if deep dives into human history and prehistory are your thing, this channel is built for you. We are working toward our next big subscriber milestone, and every single subscribe helps this channel keep making documentaries like this one. It costs you nothing, it takes 1 second, and it makes a real difference on our end. Hit subscribe, tap that bell so you do not miss the next one, and let's get back to the rain. So why was rain actually dangerous? It comes down to 3 things, and archaeologists have found evidence for all 3. The first is cold. A wet human body loses heat up to 25 times faster than a dry one. Without waterproof shelter and without dry clothing, a long, cold rainstorm in temperatures below roughly 50 degrees Fahrenheit could push a person into hypothermia within hours, not days. And most of the regions early humans lived in got that cold at night, even parts of Africa, especially at higher elevations during the wet season. The second danger was flooding. Most of the caves and rock shelters humans lived in were built into hillsides or set close to rivers and streams for the obvious reason that fresh water was nearby. But that same location turned deadly during heavy, sustained rain. Archaeologists digging inside occupied caves have found thick layers of flood sediment sitting right on top of human living floors, meaning the water rushed in while people were still using that space. In some sites, those flood layers mark the exact point where a cave was abandoned and never lived in again. The third danger, and maybe the most frightening, was competition for shelter. Rain does not just drive humans indoors. It drives every animal indoors, including the predators. There are cave sites in South Africa where the remains of humans and the remains of large cats have been found in the same layer of sediment, meaning they were using the same shelter, possibly at the same time. Some of those human remains have puncture wounds in the skull that match the size and spacing of a leopard's canine teeth almost perfectly. So a week of rain did not just make life uncomfortable. It compressed the entire ecosystem into a handful of dry spaces: predator, prey, and human, all packed into the same small shelters, all waiting for the same storm to end. In the middle of all that danger, one job mattered more than anything else: keeping the fire alive. Humans have controlled fire for an extraordinarily long time. There is solid evidence of controlled fire use going back at least 400,000 years, and possibly closer to 1,000,000 years at some sites. But here is the detail most people miss. Controlling a fire that already exists is one skill. Creating a brand new fire from nothing, pop. Using friction or a spark is an entirely different and much harder skill, and for most of the Paleolithic era, we are not even certain how many people could reliably do it. That means, if your fire went out during a week-long storm, you might not be able to start a new one. So groups developed a workaround. They carried fire with them. Smoldering embers were wrapped inside green, damp leaves to keep them from flaring up too fast, or packed inside a tough, spongy bracket fungus that grows on tree trunks, sometimes called tinder fungus. That fungus can hold a smoldering coal alive inside itself for hours without a flame. It was, essentially, a biological lighter carried from camp to camp. We know how seriously this was taken because of a 5,300-year-old body found frozen in the Alps. A preserved man researchers nicknamed Otzi. When they examined his belongings, he was carrying a complete fire-starting kit on his belt: tinder fungus, flint, a lump of iron pyrite for striking sparks, and extra dry plant material as backup tinder. Even thousands of years after the earliest cave dwellers, losing your fire was still considered serious enough that people carried dedicated survival equipment just in case. So when the rain hit, the very first move was not building a better shelter. It was protecting the fire. Move it deeper into the cave, away from the wind and the dripping ceiling. Shield it with hides or stacked brush. Feed it constantly, carefully. Not too much fuel at once, and never too little. People learned to search out the dead lower branches on evergreen trees, still shielded, dry the canopy above, and usually still dry underneath, even after days of rain. They split open soaked logs to reach the dry wood hidden at the core. They stripped birch bark up, because birch bark contains a natural compound that allows it to catch and burn even when it is damp. For at least one member of the group during a bad storm, the entire job might have simply been sitting beside that fire for hours at a time, feeding it, shielding it, never letting it die. Because that fire was not a convenience. It was warmth. It was protection from predators. It was the only way to cook food safely. And it was the center of every single social interaction the group had. Letting it go out was not just careless. It could be fatal for everyone sheltering around it. With the fire secured, you still cannot leave the cave. So what do you actually do with days of forced downtime? You make things. And the archaeological record on this point is remarkably clear. Caves and rock shelters, used by ancient humans, are packed with evidence of manufacturing. Stone tools in every stage of production, from raw cores to finished, sharpened blades. Piles of tiny stone flakes, the waste chips that fly off when someone is carefully shaping a tool, concentrated in specific spots on the cave floor, exactly where a person would sit near the firelight and work for hours without moving. But it was not only stone tools. At Blombo's Cave in South Africa, researchers uncovered what looks like a 100,000-year-old workshop for processing red ochre pigment. Abalone shells were used as mixing containers. Ochre had been ground down into a fine powder. Bone tools were used to stir and apply the mixture. This was not a quick, improvised task. This was a repeatable, deliberate production process, carried out by someone with the time and the stillness to do it properly. Then there are bone needles, fine, delicate tools with a tiny hand-drilled eye at one end, which start showing up in the archaeological record roughly 61,000 years ago in southern Africa, and later across Europe and Asia. Nobody makes a needle like that while running from danger. You make it while sitting still, focused, with hours of uninterrupted time on your hands. A rainstorm gave people exactly that. Here is where it gets even more interesting. At a Neanderthal site in France called Abri du Maras, archaeologists recovered a tiny fragment of twisted plant fiber cord, the oldest known direct evidence of string ever discovered. At Holyfels Cave in Germany, they found a 35,000-year-old carved tool made from mammoth ivory, drilled with 4 precisely sized holes and cut with spiral grooves, built specifically for twisting plant fibers into rope. Somebody sat down, inside, out of the weather, and carved a dedicated rope-making machine. Making rope by hand is slow. It is repetitive. It demands patience and stillness, which makes it close to the perfect bad weather task. And rope quietly changed everything that came after it. It let people lash tools to handles, reinforce shelters, and build snares and traps for catching animals without ever needing to chase them down. An enormous share of early human technology depends on cordage, and it was very likely invented by someone who had nothing else to do but wait out a storm. Shelters themselves were being upgraded too. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected from a site that old. Bedding. Real, deliberately constructed bedding. Layered sedges, rushes, and grasses arranged into sleeping mats roughly 77,000 years ago. The uppermost layer used leaves from a plant known as camphor bush, which naturally repels insects. This was not just a group of people surviving inside a cave. They were making that cave livable. And that bedding was periodically burned and rebuilt to keep it clean, meaning people were practicing a basic form of pest control 77,000 years before anyone wrote the word hygiene. Here is where the story takes a turn most people do not expect, because everything so far has been practical. Tools, rope, bedding, fire. What came out of these long stretches of forced stillness went far beyond survival. Chauvet Cave in southern France holds paintings that are roughly 36,000 years old, showing lions, horses, rhinos, and bears, rendered with a level of anatomical accuracy that still stuns researchers today. Several animals are painted mid-stride, muscles visibly tensed, heads turned as if caught in motion. These are not casual scratches on a wall. They are the work of people who had watched these animals for thousands of hours and could recreate them from memory alone, deep underground, by the light of a small burning lamp. Chauvet is not an isolated case. Lascaux and Altamira in Europe, and the caves of Sulawesi in Indonesia, where figurative cave art has been dated to at least 45,000 years old, making it among the oldest known figurative art on the planet. What makes this especially striking is where the paintings are actually located. They are almost never near the entrance, the obvious spot to shelter from weather. They are deep inside, sometimes hundreds of meters back, through narrow passages that require crawling on hands and knees to reach. Someone carried a small stone lamp filled with animal fat into total darkness and painted. Nobody does that on a good day when the hunting is strong and the weather is clear. Stop. You do that when you cannot go outside. When the rain has been hammering the entrance for 2 straight days, every tool you own is already sharpened. Every hide is already sewn, and there is genuinely nothing left to do except go deeper into the dark and create something that did not exist before. We cannot prove with certainty that cave art was purely a rainy day activity, but the pattern lines up in a striking way. Some of the most extraordinary creative output in all of human prehistory appears in exactly the kind of places where people were most likely to be stuck for days at a time, waiting out weather they could not control. And that idea leads somewhere even bigger. Rain may not have only produced art. It may have helped produce culture itself. Think about what actually happens when 15 to 30 people are forced into a tight, dry space together for days with genuinely nothing else to do. They talk. They listen. They share. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner published a striking study comparing daytime and nighttime conversations among the Juhansi Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert. During daylight hours, conversations stayed practical. Land rights, resource disputes, everyday complaints. But once night fell and people gathered around the fire, over 80% of the conversation shifted toward stories, songs, and shared ceremony. Firelight itself seemed to change what people were willing to talk about. It softened faces, lowered tension, and opened people up in a way daylight conversation simply did not. The campfire was not only a source of warmth, it functioned as the original social network. And what was shared around it was rarely small talk. Where do the water sources dry up first in summer? Which plants are safe to eat, and which will make you sick? Where the best flint deposits are hidden? How to track a specific, difficult animal across changing terrain? That is not gossip. That is critical survival knowledge, passing directly from one mind to another through nothing but spoken words. Beyond the practical knowledge, there were also myths. Explanations for why the rain falls, where it comes from, and where it goes when it stops. Every recorded culture on Earth has some form of rain mythology, and someone, somewhere, invented those very first stories. They almost certainly did it while sitting in the exact situation the story was trying to explain, listening to the same rain, watching the same fire. There is one detail that shows just how powerful this oral tradition really became. Some of the oldest verified oral traditions on record are Australian Aboriginal stories describing coastal changes and rising sea levels that occurred roughly 7,000 years ago, later confirmed against real geological evidence. Those stories survived for 7,000 years, using nothing but people telling them to each other, generation after generation. That kind of long-term cultural memory does not happen by accident. It only develops when groups spend an enormous amount of time doing exactly this. Sitting together, retelling the same stories, over and over, until they become permanent. So a week of rain was never dead time. It was transmission time. Pop. It was the stretch of days when knowledge moved from the old to the young, when skills were passed on by demonstration. Pop. And when the group's shared memory got reinforced and quietly updated for the next generation. Here is the part almost nobody mentions. Rain was not purely a curse. Sometimes it was the single best thing that could happen to a group. After a heavy rain finally stops, the ground softens. And soft ground holds perfect tracks, deep, clean, and easy to read. You can tell exactly which animal passed by, how long ago, how fast it was moving, and roughly where it was headed. Some of the best tracking conditions anywhere in the world exist in the day or two right after a storm clears. Rain also meant water. Natural rock depressions that fill with clean rainwater are found near almost every known prehistoric campsite, and some of them show clear signs of being deliberately carved out deeper to hold more water for longer between storms. And rain changed the entire food supply rather than shutting it down. Certain mushrooms and edible plants appear almost overnight after heavy rain. Tubers become far easier to dig out of softened, wet soil. Insects surface in huge numbers. Termites, in particular, swarm after rainfall across tropical Africa, and they are one of the most protein-dense food sources available anywhere in nature. No tools required, no weapons required. You simply gather them by hand. Chimpanzees today still gorge on termite swarms right after rainstorms, and there is every reason to believe early humans did exactly the same thing, likely on a much larger and more organized scale. So what did ancient humans actually do when it rained for a week straight? Everything that mattered. They kept the fire alive, no matter what it cost them. They shaped the tools they would need for the next hunt. They sewed the clothing that would carry them through winter. They twisted the rope that would hold their shelters and their snares together. They ground the pigment they would later use to paint animals on cave walls, far underground, by firelight. And they told the stories that carried survival knowledge forward across generations, long after the people who first told them were gone. When the storm finally broke, they walked back out into soft, tract-covered ground and got straight back to work. Rain did not slow our ancestors down. It gave them the time to prepare for everything that came after it. Every tool, every stitch of clothing, every story, every painted animal on a cave wall, all of it very likely came out of downtime. Out of the hours and days when they could not go outside and had, in theory, nothing to do but sit by a fire and think. Boredom did not exist for them the way it exists for us. Because when you are sitting in a cave, rain hammering outside, and your survival genuinely depends on what you build with your own hands. In the next few hours, you do not get bored. You get creative. And that single fact might be one of the biggest reasons any of us are still here at all. If this journey into the storms of the Ice Age blew your mind, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Drop a comment telling me which fact surprised you the most: the fire kit, the deep cave paintings, or the termite swarms. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into how our ancestors actually lived. Tap the bell so you catch the next one the moment it drops, and I will see you in the next video.